Welcome back to The Circle, the podcast where we go all in on men's work, embodiment practices, and personal growth from our queer perspective. If you're enjoying the show, please be sure to share your favorite episode, leave a review, and subscribe. If you have a question about anything you've heard us talk about, please send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. And now on to today's show. Today we're talking about something that many of us gay men carry without even realizing it: internalized homophobia. What happens when we grow up believing that who we are is wrong, even after we come out? And how does that show up in our relationships and in our sense of self-worth? We're joined today by therapist, author, and speaker Chris Tompkins for a conversation about how early messages around identity shape us and how we can start to rewrite the quiet, often painful stories we were handed about who we are allowed to be. Tim, Chris, are you ready to go all in?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
Great. Well, Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to The Circle.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm super grateful.
So your work centers around helping gay men heal from internalized homophobia, but that term can mean different things to different people. So can we just start there? How do you identify and define internalized homophobia?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a good question, and it carries a lot of stigma. I think even saying it, in my experience at least, and it's often misunderstood. It even sounds like accusatory to say internalized homophobia. And how I like to describe it, it's the unconscious messages that we internalize, that we, children from a very young age, we, just to kind of get a little psychological, is Freud. I'm sure many of you have heard, he described one of our defense mechanisms as what's called introjection. And introjection is when children internalize messages from the adults around them. It can be from society, from caregivers, but it's unconscious. And so introjection is just the process of us internalizing unconsciously messages from the adults around us. So for a lot of gay men, learning and discovering their identity, even how they're socialized as boys, gender roles, what's masculine, activities, certain things. And so they're constantly, as children, we're looking from the adults around us for any sort of semblance that who we are is okay. And so internalized homophobia for me is where we learn to shut down aspects of our identity that we feel aren't considered acceptable. And so over time, that sort of can manifest as shame.
How big a piece is safety? Because when you give that definition, it feels like safety is a component, because I'm looking at the world around me. I'm trying to understand the context and where I am and the people that I need and rely upon, and needing to understand that context and how our loved ones are meeting us feels connected to safety.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see it as such? Is that a big component of this?
Oh yeah. We're adults, our caregivers, parents. We want love. We need them for support, food, shelter, and so we're looking for any sort of message to tell us that who we are is okay. Because if we're okay, then I'm going to be able to get my needs met.
So the introjection of these messages of how we can be perceived and how we are welcomed into our families, into our caregivers, ecosystems, that doesn't always necessarily have to be directly spoken. Sometimes it can be silent. So how do you see the difference between what we see or hear and what we don't see and hear as children?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. That really was the impetus for me. I just to sort of get a snippet of my own experience of discovering internalized homophobia is that it's a clinical term. And so oftentimes you won't even hear that unless you see a therapist. And so in my own experience, I came out of the closet and I immersed myself in LGBTQ advocacy work and got really, really involved. And I moved out. I'm from Arizona, and I moved out to Los Angeles to work for a large national LGBTQ media advocacy organization. And when I moved out here, I was finding that there was something missing. There was like I couldn't quite describe it. And it was my own shame that I hadn't quite come into contact with. It's kind of from a spiritual perspective, it was my shadow. The shadow side. And so through the process of integration is where we can bring the dark to the light. And so for me, that was really being able to, my coming out experience, there were aspects of my identity that I was celebrating, and there were also aspects of my identity that I had shut down for so long that were still at play in how I interacted with other gay men specifically.
Are you open to getting specific about what those were, what those things that you were celebrating, and what were some of the things that you were unconsciously hiding?
Sure. Yeah. Celebrating. So I lived in Tucson, and I would go up to Phoenix. Phoenix had a large HRC, Human Rights Campaign presence. And so I was really wanting to get involved and be around a lot of other queer people, a lot of other gay men. I found a sort of gay mentor, someone who I could look up to. And that was all celebrated. That was all wonderful. And the things that I hadn't fully faced with regard to, I grew up with a religious background. And so coming to terms with my own sense of self as it came to sexuality and sexual expression. And so I didn't learn how to have sex as a gay man. And so having to kind of learn as I went. And I found that in my own experience of interacting with a lot of men that involved substances. And so substance use became very much a part of my relating to other men.
So when we talk about shadow, I know that there are some people who I became familiar with this term when I first did my coach training early in pandemic. And we hear it a lot in men's workspaces and in shamanic yogic workspaces.
Mm-hmm.
But the nature of the shadow is that it is hidden for a variety of reasons, sometimes because we're like actively trying to not see it. So if there's someone listening right now, what would you say they could do or an awareness they could have to be just to start to become aware that this something might exist? Because the nature of it is it's impacting how I engage, probably without me really knowing it. Right. So what would you say to the person who's like, they haven't done shadow work sessions, but they want to start to recognize if they are being impacted by one?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And so much of this is around awareness of just sort of noticing. There's a really wonderful quote that I love so much. It's by Ben Lurie. He's an author, and it says, "Once there was a man who was afraid of his shadow, then he met it, and now he glows in the dark." You've heard more, but it's sort of, sometimes even the term shadow can kind of have like a scary, like, oh gosh. And I think that in a lot of ways, in my experience, internalized homophobia is the same thing. I mean, Brene Brown, who talks a lot about shame, says that when we have shame conversations, we can shut down, change the subject, or deny that we have it. Shame is one of those things that when I start to talk about my shame, it goes down my legs, across the room, and up your legs, and then grips you. And so it evokes your feelings of shame. And so when we talk about shame, Brene Brown also says shame only needs three things to survive: secrecy, silence, and judgment. So really having compassion, and understanding. I say all the time when I'm working with someone, this isn't about blame. This is about really understanding. And the only reason internalized homophobia exists is because external homophobia exists. And so taking away that blame, because I think in my experience, again, it sort of feels like I'm a bad gay or I'm a bad person. If I have this, it makes me maybe somehow weak. If I'm out, I'm in a relationship. And so to answer your question, kind of going back, if someone's listening, start to notice. I love what you stand for. Queer Men's Embodiment is just, it's the embodied experience, noticing in my body how I'm feeling. Am I feeling sort of discomfort? Am I feeling, how do I feel? Am I aware of my body?
I love that you said that, because when we talk about embodiment and when people ask us about embodiment, and we say, oh, it's creating a conversation with our body and feeling our feelings and feeling our sensations, I think sometimes it can sound like up on the mountaintop a little bit, like we're like rubbing the crystals together, which I'm totally down for. I've been on the mountain and I've rubbed the crystals. But when we have these conversations, it's a reminder of this can be a source of information. It can be an antenna absorbing like the world and giving us information that if we know how to hear it, how to read it, how to interpret it, we can then utilize that into conscious choice and powerful engagement. So sometimes when we talk about, well, do you know what your body's feeling? And some people are like, well, that's sort of a silly thing. You're like, but no, it actually could be an unbelievably powerful thing, but we don't really talk about it that way outside of the circles where we are talking about it intensely. And so I'd like to just drive that home for everyone listening. This is a real world skill that has real world applications. When I feel something coming up in my body, there's information there that can help me become more aware of something. Oh, I'm feeling this thing in my stomach. I always feel that thing when I'm in this situation. Oh, maybe that's going to direct my attention in a way that's going to help me understand myself better or understand my world better or my engagement better. So anyway, I thank you for saying that, because sometimes it can sound maybe a little frivolous when in fact it is deep and powerful.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love everything you're saying. I literally just had a session earlier today and with a gay man, and we were talking, and what he was saying, I noticed it was virtual, and he started hitting his arm, and he was just kind of talking. And it was almost like and I just brought awareness. I said, I'm noticing that, you're hitting your arm as what you're saying. And he said, oh, well, I injured my arm. I need to get an x-ray. And we sort of were identifying, well, what was happening with you to hit your arm while you were saying what you were saying. And so it was sort of what we were able to arrive at was the incongruence. And so for a lot of gay men, I mean, this is really, I love this conversation because it's so prevalent in the ways that we even feel about our bodies. And for a lot of gay men, body image challenges, body dysmorphia, it's a big thing. And it's because we carry shame in our bodies. And so that can manifest in how we relate to our bodies. And we become disconnected from our bodies.
For my understanding, the root of internalized homophobia is shame. That I am telling myself there's something wrong with me based off of early childhood messages, whether they were direct or indirect. I've now internalized, I've introjected this narrative that there is something wrong with me. Now I'm an adult. I've come out. What are some of the subtle or surprising ways in which this internalized homophobia, this underlying shame, can start to manifest? Let's get specific.
Yeah. I love that. And I wanted to share, so there's a quote that this is from my book, but it's the quote that I use at the beginning of a section, where I'm talking about, the section is called When External Messages Seep Inside, Internalized Homophobia. And the quote I use is from Hannah Gadsby, who, if maybe you're familiar with, she did a Netflix special called Nanette in 2018 that was so powerful. Anyone listening, I highly recommend giving it a watch. It's very powerful. But the quote is from Hannah Gadsby: 70% of the people who raised me, who loved me, who I trusted, believed that homosexuality was a sin, that homosexuals were heinous, subhuman pedophiles. 70%. And by the time I identified as being gay, it was too late. I was already homophobic. You don't get to just flip a switch on that. And I think that that's a powerful kind of example of, kind of to your question, is that, even in spiritual work, I taught social emotional learning for 6 years, and it was all about helping young people feel empowered. And a part of that work is to uncover beliefs that you have that are negative, that that sort of inner critic. And so what I learned throughout my 6 years is that no matter who I was working with, I was decades older than a lot of the kids that I worked with. They all shared the same beliefs about kind of certain things, money, success, school, failure. And I draw the same parallels with regard to sexuality. And so even though maybe my parents, me specifically growing up, never told me, Chris, you are going to hell because you're gay. It was something that I absorbed from the messages that I took in from society, culture, religion, all of those things. What I learned about sports and athleticism, and I didn't relate. And so feeling that maybe I was less than and I needed to be a certain way. So those are sort of the not explicit ways that we absorb messages. And they're often unconscious. And so then when we grow up and we become like myself, came out of the closet, I'm working for this large LGBT media advocacy organization. And yet how I'm relating to men around sex, a lot of discomfort, even noticing myself, code switching depending on who I'm around. I mentioned I'm from Arizona, so that's really where all of this was born. My journey of even writing the book was I was at home visiting Arizona, and I wasn't able to make it home for Christmas. So my mom had all of my relatives over. I was actually in Arizona giving a workshop at an LGBTQ advocacy conference. And it was about self-care as an effective tool for advocacy. And so after that conference, I went home to my mom's, and all my cousins, nieces and nephews, family, and my nephew, who was 6 at the time, ran up to me and in front of everyone asked, Uncle Chris, is she your girlfriend? And that question changed my life because I realized why does he think I have a girlfriend? Oh, wait, he doesn't know it. Does he not know I'm gay? I just kind of thought that maybe his parents talked to them about that. So then I started to ask around to the adults in my family, and most of the people responded, oh no, they're too young to understand. Or I thought about talking to them, but I just don't know what to say. And I realized let's peel back the layers here. What are we really thinking about what it means to be gay? And so that uncovered this whole area. And even myself as an uncle, what was I doing? How were my nieces and nephews perceiving me? I didn't have a boyfriend at the time, so I never brought anyone home.
So in this moment that you're describing, am I hearing correctly that there was maybe a lack of pride in who you were that was like an external way of you expressing, hey, this is who I am. I just got back from this Pride conference or this LGBTQ advocacy conference, and this is specifically what I do because this is who I am, and I'm bringing that to my family with pride to let them know who I am. Internalized homophobia maybe prevented you from expressing and sharing authentically, fully who you are with your family?
Yeah, that's a really, really good way of framing it. And what I hear with you saying, even you reflecting to me what I'm saying, is basically compartmentalization.
Yes.
And that is very prevalent with regard to aspects of identity.
I do feel compelled to jump in here, though, where in the situation you just described, you would have been the only person required to have to do that to be their authentic self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the straight people in the room weren't going to have to remind everybody that they were straight and proudly living a straight life. It was and so this is, I think, a burden that queer people sometimes have to be so I think what you're saying is right, and simultaneously recognizing, so there's more burden on me or more onus on me to be I have to be proud of how I am because I have the burden of telling you. And if I don't tell you, then I have to process why I didn't tell you, where everyone else in the room just got the luxury of the assumption that they were straight because they are, and you know what I mean? It's so I want to be gentle for anyone who's listening and hearing this because, straight people don't come out, and queer people often come out over and over and over again, and it isn't nothing. And so recognizing that's part of the process. No one else had to walk around and be like, "Hey, I'm straight and I'm proud of it."
Mm-hmm.
And did you know that I was straight? And that,
mm-hmm.
But then we have to, and it's also sort of a weird thing because sometimes it gets wrapped up in sex, right? So to be it's interesting to then run up to someone like my mom and be like, I'm going to give you a piece of information that gives you some sort of insight. I've never heard straight people talk about it that way. So there's just like a responsibility I think we want to keep in mind because no one else had to do it.
I so agree, and that's what I wrote a book about. It is, yeah. It literally it's exhausting, and it puts the onus. For sure, I literally recently wrote an article a few weeks ago about an experience I had here in Los Angeles. I went to get my nails painted, or I went to get a manicure, and I was thinking about getting my nails painted. So the person the manicurist who was helping me, super friendly. We were having conversation. She told me her son, I had the same name as her son. Her son's also named Chris. And toward the end, I was thinking about getting my nails painted. So I asked her about nail polish colors. And she was like, no, you don't want nail polish. People will think you're gay. And it was in that moment I did kind of the whole, what you just described of, oh gosh, do I say something? This is exhausting. I'm at a nail salon. Do I want to come out to this person? Also, it bumped up against, do I want to disappoint her heteronormative assumption? She thought I was straight. Do I want to, that's what's so nuanced about this conversation and I think this requires, like anything spiritual, it requires that deep self-introspection and that conscious awareness and that willingness to sort of look at myself and kind of assess, what's sort of happening. Because I think multiple things could be true. And I do think that there is a heavy burden that is placed on minorities in general to do the heavy lifting. I also think that as an uncle, for me, that I do have a responsibility about how I want to help my nieces and nephews learn about anything. Money as an example. I decided not to give my nieces and nephews gifts, that's for their parents, but I would open up a savings account for them, and every holiday or birthday, instead of giving them something, I would deposit money in their account. So that was sort of the way that I was helping just pass on some wisdom around finances.
I want to go back to internalized homophobia and this idea that there's something wrong, but I also, because I want to add the messaging that there is something sort of inherently disgusting about queer people or queer sex. And I want to give an example, which is, when I was a young person, one of my closest friends was a real ally. But I remember she said to me at one point, she was like, Tim, if you're going to be gay, then be the pitcher, not the catcher. And if you don't know what that term means and you're listening, be the top, not the bottom. And I remember thinking in that moment, because I was actually kind of young and it was all sort of theoretical still at that time, that I can't afford to lose you. You're one of the few people that are still choosing to support me in this pretty scary time. And yet I still recognize that there's part of who I am that you might find disgusting, and then having to walk through the world with that, and then, so I think I wanted to bring up that story because it's really tricky. It's not as simple as walk away every time someone can't hold you in or see you fully. Sometimes you're like, well, I can't afford to lose you, so I'll take what I can get. And if that means that you think these things are disgusting, then I might learn to not do them or hide them from you or whatever the thing might be, because I'm still afraid and I want friends or community or support.
Right.
I think a lot of queer people might have had a similar experience. And so this internalized homophobia isn't confusing when you think, well, you were playing a very nuanced game of survival.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think, to your point, is misunderstood, is that, I say terms like internalized homophobia, and you could replace it with kind of going back to the Brene Brown quote. I didn't fully finish that, but she said, sometimes when you're talking about shame, because of everything I mentioned happens, she says, replace the word, replace the, and so the subtitle of my book is called A Parent's Guide to Changing the Messages from the Playground. And so the messages from the playground was an analogy that I used to sort of help me orient my own experience of navigating is that no matter who we are or where we come from, we all play on the same playground, meaning that the playground, it's an analogy to describe the collective conscious, is that the playground is the mind and the messages are the subconscious beliefs that we all internalize about everything.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I'm going to bring us back to specifics again. Let's dive into Tim's example here, right?
Okay.
Like, I really want to give people something to latch onto. So we talked about topping and bottoming. And how there was a loved one in Tim's life that was saying you could be less than if you're one of these things.
Right.
And that's just one example of an internalized message that we receive. So let's unpack it. What do you make of that? And how do you work with your clients who might be coming to you with something similar?
Yeah, I think what brings up for me, and it's a great example, is kind of the bottom shaming that happens in a lot of queer spaces, specifically for gay men, is that it's sort of, in my experience, there's a lot of sort of pride, or I'll make it known that I'm the top, but when it comes to bottoming, it's sort of, there's some kind of slut shaming or kind of hungry bottom, this sort of notion that there's this, it's kind of, it's like deprecating, it's putting down. I remember I even worked at a gay bar here in West Hollywood for 11 years. And we used to have on the drink menu, when Moscow Mules became really popular, that we had on our drink menu Moscow Mules, but we had fruity mules and then masculine mules. And so there was
that was on the menu, just to be clear, like it was like 2 columns with like a header.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I just sort of use that as an example of every time someone ordered a drink and every time someone put that in the register, it was just this unconscious imprint. Like, you see billboards, you take in images on, it's all of those imprints that we get about separating fruity versus masculine. That's where that sort of code switching comes in, is even in those spaces, there's sort of reverence for masculine and sort of shame for feminine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, that was the Madonna song, right? What it feels like for a girl, where like we just, I think culturally we think anything feminine is less than, or it is wild to me that we would put on something like a cocktail, a label. Now, so fruity isn't the worst word if you're actually describing that it has fruit in it.
And it did have fruit in it.
Sure. But masculine as a descriptor for a drink feels wild. And I know that like culturally you could say like, oh, like bourbon on the rocks, that's a masculine drink. You're like, no, then this goes to the idea of like emptiness, right? And you're like, no, it's just a drink. It's a drink. It's the same. It's a drink. Like a Manhattan and a martini are not that different, except some ingredients. So to say that one is masculine and feminine is kind of laughable, and yet it's everywhere in our culture.
Right? But if our shame is so deep that it prevents us from experiencing that beverage, we don't know if we would even like it or not, because we're so prevented from even trying it. And so how many things in this life are we walking around avoiding connecting with that could potentially bring us closer to our authenticity because of this internalized homophobia? Because we're afraid for justifiable reasons, right? Like these are things that were given to us as children in an effort to fit in, to survive, all very understandable. But now as we grow up and we're out, like, how do we bring awareness to the things that we may be rejecting or that we may be putting a label on or a judgment on that are preventing us from fully experiencing something that could bring us closer to our authenticity?
Yeah, it's such a good way of putting it, because everything you're saying, I'm just thinking of, children when they're young want to belong. They want to be a part of, and it's safety, kind of going back to what you were saying. And so there's something that happens when children start to develop at around junior high, middle school, is they start to notice differences. They start to notice that person is drawing better than that person's better at math than I am. My niece just started track and she started to notice that she's slower. And so she has a lot of shame about that. And so that's just kind of natural part of human development. And then as it relates to identity, if we start to kind of take in consideration all that's happening internally for someone, they're constantly looking around for reassurance that who they are is okay. So if I notice that there's a part of me that isn't going to be received, I'm going to shut that part of me down. I'm going to put that in the shadow. And I'll share two things that I think are really important just to kind of contextualize this conversation when it comes to internalized homophobia, is that as a clinician, when I'm working with intimate partner violence, and so there's a big difference between intimate partner violence in LGBTQ relationships and intimate partner violence in non-LGBTQ relationships. And the big difference is that intimate partner violence in LGBTQ relationships always occurs in the backdrop of homophobia, meaning that internalized homophobia plays a big part in what's happening in the relationship. And it's the shadow. It's the disconnected part of me that I'm seeing in you that I don't like. And then when it comes to childhood development, one of the main barriers to development for LGBTQ youth, there are a few of them, but one of the main barriers is internalized homophobia. So these are sort of child and then adult, what it can look like. And I think that gives context to kind of what it is that is important to, talk about this.
So in that example with your niece, so if she's telling herself, or if anyone's telling themselves like, oh, there's somebody better than I am, so I must not be good.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple possibilities. One is I can double down my efforts and I can try to improve.
Mm-hmm.
The other is I can quit and give up because I've now internalized I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And if by doing that, I could be disconnecting myself from something that brings me joy. If running brings me joy, but if I'm perceiving it as something that I'm not good at, then I'm disconnecting from it.
Right.
And so that shut down part of us that starts to go into the shadow, like what advice do you have to people to reconnect with some of those things as they're working through this shame? So in any example that we've gone through today, like how could we start to bring it back?
Yeah, I love inner child work and being able to, tap into that young part of ourselves that maybe we denied, we didn't like. A lot of the messages, with the clients that I work with, I have one client who I'll never forget, he said that when he was younger, there was no room for him to be gay. He felt like he could never fully breathe. And I think that gives a real somatic experience of what it's like, to feel like he could never fully inhale. And so the work that we do is around just reconnecting with that aspect of himself and getting to know that younger part of him who maybe he denied or shut down, and being able to integrate that part of him. And this process is a process of integration.
I'm curious, the thing that's coming up for me when I'm hearing you speak now is the importance of safe play. And when I say play in this context, I'm not talking about like sexual play necessarily, but I feel like what I'm hearing is we get to these messages and then we start to make choices and behave with these ideas in mind. So now if I'm an adult and I've been doing this for 30 years or 35 years because it's just become my habit now, and I want to start to explore. And so when I think about embodiment work, I want to start to understand what actually feels good in my body. And a lot of these circles are forms of physical somatic exploration. You could argue a kind of play into which you get to then have an experience that you might otherwise not. So I'm curious, is conscious safe play one of the tools that you use to help people kind of rediscover what is their authenticity? And then if so, how?
I haven't said it as conscious safe play in that way, but I do think it is about getting to know themselves and what feels safe for them, creating rituals, creating experiences that they can reconnect to themselves, the part of them that they disconnected from. So oftentimes that does require us to be able to reconnect with our body in ways that maybe we were disconnected from before. Because so much of our shame we hold in our bodies. And so being able to do things that can support us, it's like the holistic approach, body, mind, and spirit.
So maybe play isn't the right word. There's a program with my teacher, Amir Khaligi at Embodied Masculine, where there is a big component of it is the opportunity to be creative. So I'm curious if conscious safe play isn't how you frame it, how do you frame it? And then, right, like how do you describe this either in your books or to your clients?
I describe it as being able to tap into maybe a way for them, well, depending on who they are and where they're at and their understanding of spirituality, consciousness. A lot of gay men I work with have religious trauma. And so there's this notion of even that world that can feel really unsafe. So finding what feels good to them and meeting them where they're at, and then being able to tap into things like values, like what do you value, and values different from what expectations were placed on you. And so almost like getting to be able to know themselves.
I've got an example for us to work through with this one.
Here we go.
I'm all about specifics. I try to bring it from like the theoretical to the specifics as much as I can. So I'm sorry for being annoying of like bringing this back. So
you're being terrific.
I had a lot of shame around singing. Singing growing up, somebody at some point gave me the message that if you are a singer or a performer, you are gay. And so I used to love singing. I was a very happy, singy, songy kid. And then somewhere along the lines, somebody told me, I don't know who, I don't know when, I don't know where, that if I sing, if I am a singer, I am gay. And so I stopped singing. And I locked that away, and I locked it up for a very long time. And I think that we recently had a voice coach on an episode, and somebody that I work with personally, about reclaiming my voice. And this is even in my spoken voice, of how much shame I carried around projecting because of the label that singing, expressing myself that way, is gay. And the unpacking that I've had to do in order to now feel more comfortable with even just communicating, talking, and then eventually singing and expressing.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That's a beautiful example. And it's about reclaiming something that was communicated to you that you felt like you needed to disconnect from. So being able to tap into and use your voice.
Yeah. And something that used to bring me joy.
Yeah.
Right? And bringing this back to authenticity. Right?
Yes.
How much of this world are we disconnected from because we're afraid of the label that it will put on us?
Right.
I was afraid for a long time of bottoming because of what that might mean about me. I was afraid to sing because of what that might mean about me. And now it's like, okay, baby stepping, can I reclaim that a little bit so that I can figure out what is authentic to me?
And so I want to just bring up, because in your example and the stuff that we do in men's work, it's all built on the idea of a trustable, safe container. So it isn't as if you start to recognize that you have internalized homophobia and then you walk over to the wall and you flip the switch and say, no more internalized homophobia. I think everyone listening understands that wouldn't be the way it happens. So what you did—
Can we find that switch though?
I mean, I would love if, I want the switch also when you're going through a breakup and you're like, I don't hurt anymore. But so when in your example, you talked about this, but then you went into a safe space where you could start to re-explore this thing in order to find out how it felt and if it was still a part of you and if you still wanted to cultivate it. And I have to imagine in your work too, then, creating these safe places, and obviously I imagine if someone's working with you one-on-one, that is a safe place. So how else do you help people when they're not with you one-on-one find safety in their exploration in a world that may not be able to meet you or fully understand the place on your journey that you're at?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question. And it's such a good example, of what you shared, Eric. And I think that, for me, therapy, I often will say this when I'm working with gay men, because sometimes what can happen in the relationship with the therapeutic relationship, there's something called transference, which is the unconscious emotional response that the client has to the therapist. And so if a gay man comes to me wanting to work on something related to their identity, that's very much a part of the therapeutic work. And so it's in our relationship that we get to have that reparative experience. And then we get to work through some of those difficult, ruptured experiences as it relates to identity and male specific relationships. And so, doing things like kind of what you described, with your example of singing, for clients that I work with who are wherever they're at. I started working with someone who came out a year ago recently. And so we're talking about ways that he can get involved in things that he likes, homosocialization, so meeting other gay men, doing, what would be really fun for him to get involved in.
That's a huge component, what you just said. What is it that you like? When I
Mhm.
first started therapy a couple of years back, restarted therapy, that was what we worked on. I did
Mhm.
not have a semblance. I did not have an idea of what it was that I liked. If somebody
Mhm.
asked me what I wanted to do, I was like, well, I don't know, right? Because I
Mhm.
didn't have a connection with myself.
Mhm.
I had a, a history of putting myself aside, my wants, my needs, my desires, to please others,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
fit in.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have a connection with my wants. And so I love that that's how you're working with this client of like, what do you like?
Mhm.
Right? Let's start there. And if you don't know what you like, okay, like let's explore. Let's do some conscious play. Right. And so I love that term that Tim used is like, how can we start to discover what it is that we like in a
Mhm.
safe container?
Yeah. And that's not uncommon, with people I work with, is not knowing what they like. Because if you come from a world where you sort of learn to how to be, you lose touch with that authentic sense of self and what it is that you like.
I remember as a kid, because I you ready to drink?
Let's
Because
Chris, you're about to be introduced to the circle drinking game. I hope that you have a beverage nearby. It does not have to be alcoholic. It could be I've got my water bottle, so
so
be prepared.
I have on occasion on this podcast mentioned that I used to be a dancer.
A
And that
professional dancer, everyone drink.
that's a drinking game, but it was a big part of my life. And on the podcast, we share parts of our parts of our lives. But I bring it up because I had loving caregivers, my mom and my mom's mom, so my maternal grandmother, both of whom were doing their best. Right? They like I know that they were trying their best, but they were terrified of what it meant to be for me to be gay, and so they were like not like subtly manipulating me in lots of ways, and they were trying to tell me what I should like and what I shouldn't like, and what I they would often say it as you like this, and even if it had nothing to do with like the truth of my experience, and that's a really tricky thing. Then, luckily for me, my desire to be a professional dancer
Drink.
was strong enough, and I had support that allowed me to continue to do it. But if not, I can imagine lots of people adopting what it is they think they like based on, and so then the discovery process is probably a really tricky one, because then there might be parts of you that actually do fall in love with that thing a little bit because you had to you had to do it for 15 years, right? Like, so I actually really like football now because I
Mhm.
had to watch so much football that I do get some joy out of it, but I don't think it's where I would have gone if I had just been allowed. And now, of course, we'll never know. So I think it's like a very complicated thing to discover what you like when it's like, well, maybe someone else told you and then they gave you 3 decades to practice,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. That's such another good example. For me, I grew up, I mean, I say I literally could have won an Oscar for the role that I played as a straight guy, because
Yeah.
I, again, coming from a religious background, I really truly believed that I learned that I could go to hell for being gay. And so I learned to be really good And that's still something that I contend with, is how much of myself is this authentically me wanting to be of service versus this sort of drive to be good. And so, growing up in college, I did the thing. I joined the fraternity. I had girlfriends. I used to dress literally so that I was playing a part. And so part of my self-discovery of my authentic self was my expression of how I would dress, wearing bracelets, wearing rings, jewelry, those kinds of, I never would wear that before because I didn't want anyone to consider the possibility that I could be gay, because I really did believe that I could go to hell. And so part of my own experience, I remember my nephews, my mom used to, and kind of to your point, I think so much of this isn't about blame. It's about really, my mom was doing the best that she could because she grew up thinking, that's the thing with these beliefs, is that they're passed down. And so my mom and I have come a long way. We've done a lot of work. But she used to really try and encourage my stepfather, who was really athletic, to, teach Chris how to throw a ball. That was always her thing, to try and encourage my stepdad to play sports with me, to teach me how to throw a ball. But I knew that she was doing that. So I learned from a very young age that, this part of me is unlovable. And so when I became an uncle, and this is what really kind of going back to what changed my own role and the onus of kind of what I wanted to be, is I remember my nephew asking me to go outside and play catch for the first time. And I literally had a somatic experience. Like, I got nervous. I was like, I don't know how to throw a ball, and I don't want to throw a ball. And so being able to confront those aspects of myself and to work through them. And I used to not think that I was an athlete, because of what I learned was athletic. And I love indoor hot room spinning. And I do that a lot. And I remember it wasn't until a few years ago that the instructor was saying, something about, you're all athletes. And I literally walked away from that class with I was like, oh my God, I am an athlete. I am athletic. But it was this internal shift that I literally for so long equated athleticism with what I learned growing up.
I'm so excited by what you just said, because it is such a weird, arbitrary distinction that we have made culturally. So this idea that if you play football, you're an athlete. If you're a male cheerleader, you're not. Mm-hmm. And then anyone paying attention. Now, I think there are so many different kinds of athletes, and I've talked about the Olympics. I love all of them. But watch a male cheerleader. Like, that's an athlete. Like, sure. Do you know what I mean? But we have this idea of, but we've agreed this is the right and this is not, And so I love it. Yeah, you're on a spin bike. You're an athlete. People in my yoga class, if they want to identify as an athlete, you can identify. Like, so I love that you had that moment, because the truth is you're an athlete on that bike. Mm-hmm. Good for you.
Yeah, I am. And I think so much of this work, and that's what I love what you stand for in your conversations, is the spirituality piece, is that so much of this, any spiritual path is a process of unlearning fear, unlearning things of separation. And as it relates to identity, for me being gay, it was a spiritual process. It was unlearning the things that I had learned that made me feel not lovable or not enough. And that really is the essence of what internalized homophobia is it's because I do think there's a difference between defense mechanisms, which is the introjection. When we all have defense mechanisms, they are what keeps us safe. It's like skin. When I work with a new client, I don't want to just rip off their skin. It's because their defenses are there for a reason.
Well, another part of the spiritual process, as I've come to understand it, is an acknowledgement of the process. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing with you too. So when you're in the work, again, the light switch, we're not expecting you to walk over to the light switch and change it. The expectation is to create a relationship and then be in process with that thing, whether it's your sense of self, your authenticity, your true voice, your physical body, whatever. And then that relationship is going to ebb and flow. and the graph will be trending upwards if you keep at it. But that would mirror literally everything else in our life. So why should this be different? And I think allowing that. So if you are coming to terms with internalized homophobia, welcome to the journey that you will be on for a long time as this relationship slowly reveals itself, slowly uncovers. You start to learn more about how it feels and like what things work for you and what things don't work for you. And sometimes you're going to find something that doesn't work for you and that might not feel good. And having the allowance that process can exist.
100%. That's so beautifully said. What you're saying too reminds me of the hero's journey. I love the metaphor, the sort of hero's journey is that in anything in our lives, it's like 12-step recovery. It's the low bottom. It's the thing that got us to our knees is the very thing that is the doorway to our freedom. I think that's kind of the journey of the process of what you're describing and that's what I'm passionate about talking about this, is because there's that misconception that internalized homophobia is this scary bad thing. I mean, it can lead to scary bad things. Ultimately, it's the very thing that is going to set us free and give me there's this type of therapy and couples work that I do. Not that it's my therapy, it's called imago therapy, but I use that in couples therapy because I love it so much. The basis foundation is that we consciously or unconsciously seek out partners to help us heal our childhood wounds. And so, when we meet partners and it's not a good relationship or there's challenges, it's the process of learning that is going to ultimately be the thing that's going to help you heal the childhood wounds. And so I do the same thing with the internalized homophobia. It's this process of unlearning that is going to give me this freedom and confidence and strength. But I can't spiritual bypass the process.
It's a journey.
It's a journey.
It can be a difficult one, be challenging, be scary. It's made a little easier when you feel a little less alone in it. And so it is my hope that anyone listening to this episode can relate to something here and feel a little more affirmed, because what I heard throughout the duration of this episode and learning about this topic was that there's so much of the internalized homophobia that came from not feeling affirmed, not feeling valued, and not feeling good enough, not feeling right. And so the affirmation that I am enough, that you are enough, that we are all enough. Yes, for me, the most important one is that it comes from me, but along the journey, feeling it and hearing it from other people is so important. Having that validation that I'm not broken. I'm not super weird. I am weird, but I'm not like wrongly weird. And feeling that affirmation and then being able to affirm myself.
Yeah. And if I could add to that is what you're talking about is I think a big component to this conversation is something called benign neglect. And that's, or in therapy, we'll call it a null environment. And that's where a child didn't receive negative overt messages, but they also didn't receive positive affirmed messages. It's like this baseline null experience. And that can create just as much damage as overt messages. And that's, for me, what I was so wanting to convey in my family is to go back to your point is that, I had to do the work, but also I was thinking about all the kids in my family because I have a big family. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, there are kids right now in our family who are discovering their identities. And if no one's talking about it, then we're creating the same null environment that I experienced, and it's contributing to their own experiences of shame.
That's why communities are so important, why conversations like this are so important, why resources are so important, like your book. Could you just tell us the title of your book?
Raising LGBTQ Allies, A Parent's Guide to Changing the Messages from the Playground.
Because, when we're talking about the process and the idea that we're constantly being reminded to reflect onto it. So we're having this conversation now. You're thinking about it, but hopefully in a day or two, someone says something else that like makes you come back to it and think of it again and think of it again. And so having resources that will support people through the process of it, which is going to be revisit it. How does it look now? How does it look now? How does it feel now? Is so important. So thank you so much for bringing yourself to this conversation, but also your book as that resource, because I think there are a lot of great people with a lot of really great intentions that need help in their process so that they can meet, with regards to your book, maybe young people in their process, right? And so like we can do a lot of really important healing work if we can all meet each other there and support each other through it. So thank you for all of that, because I wonder how things would be different for me if my mom had read the book, but there are other moms who can read the book.
There are. Yeah. No, oh my gosh. Thank you so much for even being willing to, have me on your show. And I love what you're doing, and just to be able to make this as an offering.
So we close the show with a round robin of how we're feeling. So I'm feeling very complete with this conversation. Tim, how are you feeling?
I feel complete.
And Chris?
Yeah, I feel grateful. Yeah, complete.
Excellent. Tim, will you take us out, please?
I will. Let's draw our spine tall and close our eyes. Take a deep inhale through the nose. Soft exhale through the mouth. And it is with deep appreciation and gratitude for any insights, awarenesses, or understandings that may have been gained in this shared sacred space that we now release the archetypes and the spirits that we invited in. And with these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.